Welcome to the Del Walmsley Radio Show. Listen and grow as Del questions the status quo, encourages you to think differently, and empowers you to make a better life. Get ready as Del challenges core beliefs, seeks the truth, and reveals the roadmap to the lifestyle you really want. And now your host, multi-millionaire, national award-winning investor, CEO and founder of Lifestyles Unlimited, Del Walmsley.
Welcome to Del Walmsley Radio Show, where the hype ends and the help begins. I'm your host, Del Walmsley, and as always, we're working on your financial freedom. I apologize, my throat is still blown out, but want to get this going today. We have a great show. I have gone to the mailbag, picked up some really complicated questions. So for those of you that like to be challenged a little bit and don't like just the easy stuff, today is going to be the show for you. We start out with a lady who sends us this question. Says, I have a single-family home rental I own since 2004 and have over $400,000 in equity and no more depreciation. I do make about $1,000 positive income, and I'm assuming that's a month since it's paid in full and she's got $400,000 equity, but save it for the cost to rehab the property in the future, which seems to be between around $10,000 each time someone leaves after living there from 5 to 7 years. So what you've got here is you've got a lady, first of all, that's got a property probably should not be a rental property. If it's, if her equity is $400,000, that's a problem. In addition to that, she's only got $1,000 a month worth of positive cash flow because she has no leverage on this deal. And we move on to the rest of the question. It says, what I'd want to know is if I take a HELOC on that property and invest in another rental, how do I get the numbers to make sense on a new property at today's cost plus high interest rates? Even if I break even on the rent, I will not have the repair buffer, much less any personal income. By the way, I live in Southern California, so it took years to really be positive on the first property. And with a HELOC, that property will also have a lower cash flow. I'm just tired of having equity not working for me. There's an old saying, you can't solve the problem at the same level of thinking the problem was created. And there are so many things wrong in this lady's email and about the way she's dealing with her situation that I'm afraid that I'll leave one out. So I wrote a bunch of this stuff down. I don't normally take notes, but this one was so complicated, I just wanted to make sure I could help you with it. First of all, don't own rental properties in California. It's ridiculous. I wouldn't own them in New York. The prices are too high, and the landlord laws are contrary to the benefit of the landlord. They're beneficial to the tenant. You have rent and price controls, which makes it almost impossible to keep your rents high enough to have any positive cash flow. Like she said, it took her years and years and years to get to where she had positive cash flow. She's right. If she takes out a HELOC loan, she's going to have less cash flow, but at least she'll have some money to invest with. But she's also right. You can't go buy another property for those kinds of prices, which there is in California, and expect to get any positive cash flow at all. So what is she to do? First of all, she's listening to my radio show and sending me a question. I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean, let's just focus for a second. You realize I tell you over and over and over again for 34 years now, don't buy in California. She did. And maybe she just moved out of her own personal residence. Maybe she didn't buy there. Maybe she just inherited the property from, someone else. So what do? Well, the first thing you do is sell that property. You've got to get out of that property and 1031 into 10 more properties. For $400,000 equity, you should buy. The average price we pay down on a property is around $25,000. And so if you put $25,000 down on $400,000, let's see, let's get out the trusty cell phone here, man, and do some cell phone math, because that's, I didn't even think about this aspect of it. 400,000 divided by 25,000, I mean, you buy 16 properties. With those 16 properties, I'm going to go through some examples here in a second, you could make $1 million and have massive cash flow. But none of that fits in her mind because she's thinking about the real estate in and where she lives. And that's the problem. You need to be able to think about real estate as you buy real estate where you want to live for you to live in, but you buy rental investment properties where you should buy them, which is in areas where they are not controlled by Nazis. I mean, basically, when you look at the Democrats and the way they control business in the states that they control, it's just like living in a Nazi world. You have no control of your own assets. So she's got to get that money out of that state. California has had record number of people moving out of it for the last 5 years, maybe even more, maybe 10 years. I just know of in the last 5, they've really been advertising it. In fact, there's so many people moving out, there's no U-Hauls left in California. They have to ship them back in gigantic they have to bring them back in gigantic parades of them to get them back because everybody's leaving and there's none left in there. Normally there'd be a flow of people coming and people going, and the trucks would be in both locations, but no, there's none of them. Everybody's moving out of California. Businesses are moving out of California. It's just a terrible thing to do, and you emotionally can't understand that. Say, but this is a beautiful place. Why can't I just live here and invest here? Because of the communists running the state. I mean, it is impossible to live in a democratically controlled environment and pull off a business that makes sense. Just doesn't work. So having gone on that little bandstand about, which is, you could call it a political rant, but it's really a reality rant. We can't buy there. Don't you think we'd love to buy there? Don't you think we'd love to live there? But we can't live there because the taxes are too high. We can't buy there because the rules and regulations are too ridiculous. And so off the rant, let's talk about what she can do. If she brings her money out into the other 30 states in the country that are not controlled by communists, then you're going to be able to do this. The average rental property that we buy, the worst deal, before I go average, I'm going to go worst. The worst deal that I would agree to as a consultant, right? As a consultant, the worst deal I would agree to would be a $30,000 down payment on a house that has a $15,000 instant equity capture, which would be a 50% instant gain the day you bought it. You would have to have at least a $200 a month positive cash flow. And with $30,000 down, that'd be an 8% cash-on-cash return. So your total gain the first year would be 58%, and then it would be 8% and up thereafter. This lady with $400,000 of equity on a $1,000 positive cash flow, she's earning 3% per year. But that 3% per year is covered by depreciation. And in the state of California, she pays not only income taxes on that, she's paying state income taxes on that. So she's probably earning about 1% on her money. It's ridiculous. All right. With us, we use depreciation, and we're in states where there are no state income taxes, and hence she will receive all of that 58%. Now, that is the worst case deal. Let's move on to what would be considered an average deal. A more typical deal looks like $20,000 to $30,000 down, and an equity capture instant gain of $20,000 to $30,000, which means 100% capital gain or better the day you buy the property. In addition, that property's generally cash flow between $200 and $400 a month, and with the 20 to 30% down payment, or $20,000 to $30,000 down payment, that's going to be somewhere between 8 and 15% cash-on-cash return. Again, all that covered by depreciation and 100% capital gain. So the first year you're making between 108 to 115%. Then every year after that, 8 to 15%. But I got to tell you the story of this 18-year-old kid. He bought a duplex for $5,000 down, did a massive amount of rehab on it, got a hard money loan on it because there was so much repairs to be done, and he bought it so inexpensively that he was able to only have to put $5,000 down on a property that was worth hundreds, thousands of dollars, and about $300,000 or so, I think. And he ended up making $175,000 of captured equity, which he sold the property and made the $175,000, and that was a 3,500% return. The cash flow on the property, by the way, was about $400 a month, which would have been a 96% return cash flow wise. And I don't know if he sold, I'm going to take that back. I don't know if he sold this one or not, if that was instant equity capture that he hasn't got yet, or if and he had the cash flow, or if he sold it, and that's what his cash flow would have been. But the numbers were that, and so I just want you to see that this lady needs to get out of that stuff in California and move on, right? And it's because she can't see any difference. She's looking at all of her options as to what you could do in California, and she just can't make any sense of it. It doesn't rationalize out. It doesn't pencil out in any way, shape, and form. If you keep trying to think you're going to buy real estate in California and make any money with it, you're crazy. It just doesn't happen. All right, moving on. A gentleman sent me this email. It says, I currently own a property that consists of a duplex and a single-family home in San Antonio. These are on adjoining lots and are appraised as a triplex by the tax district as a single property. Now, that's very unusual. And I didn't have a chance to get back with the gentleman to find out why that was, because, I mean, if you got two lots, it should be two properties, right? Irrespective of that, it's still going to be single-family housing. It's still going to be financed the same way. It's still going to be valued the same way. Although if they're calling it a triplex, then you've got to look for triplex-type comparable sales as opposed to a duplex and a single-family house. It would definitely be worth more as a duplex and a single-family house. So if I were him, I would want to find that out and get it done. He goes on and says, I'm fixing to refi into a DSCR loan. All right? A DSCR loan is a loan that is a debt coverage ratio loan, meaning they're not looking at your personal income or on this to cover the payment of the loan. They're looking at the asset value and the rental income of the property as a standalone vehicle. This is how we look at commercial pieces, and typically not how we would look at a single-family property per se. But in this case, he's getting, and they have this. It came out, I became aware of it about a year ago. If it was available before that, it may have a year earlier or whatever. But they came up with these things that are really like commercial loans for single-family houses. So he goes on and says, you talk about not doing an LLC. I'm wondering, since this technically a triplex, and along with the different type of tenants that come with duplexes, should I refi this into an LLC to get the extra protection, or just keep everything in my name? Well, here's why this one's so complicated. Typically, we would buy single-family houses in our own name. Why is that? Because we would be able to get Fannie Mae loans on these things, which are much better loans than this DSCR loan is. You get a larger amount of equity, a lower interest rate than a DSCR loan. So we typically want to buy them into our own name. For whatever reason, he's not doing that and using a DSCR loan, probably because he's got some type of a income issue or credit issue or whatever. He's got some kind of issue, or he just doesn't know what the options are. However, based on that fact, this DSCR loan, they do not care if you buy it inside of an LLC, whereas Fannie Mae will not allow you to buy them inside of an LLC. So in this particular case, he has, if he really worries about the risk of the tenants suing him for whatever reason, then it's perfectly fine to buy it inside of an LLC. Now, let's talk about that. LLC costs money to put together. Whatever you can get it done for, $1,000. You might get a cheap one done by somebody just boilerplates it for, $500. You have to maintain it though. And in many states like Texas, you have to pay franchise tax or some other type of a company tax that you wouldn't have to pay if it was just in your name. So you need to look into that in your decision of whether or not to use an LLC. In our case, you say, well, Del, if you don't have an LLC, why and how would you protect yourself as far as liabilities? And what I've always spoke about is there's 3 levels to liability protection that we're pretty close on, maybe 4 levels if I'll add one more to it. And this is for apartment complexes. Every apartment complex, we use all 4 levels of liability. For single-family houses, we used just the first 2. So let's talk about the first 2. The number one most important thing is to have a general liability policy that goes up to, say, for a single-family house, $1 million. And this is to cover your trip and fall type stuff. Whenever somebody gets hurt on your property, this liability insurance covers you. But within that liability insurance policy, you have another issue, and that is the fact that most lawsuits in real estate occur from or out of the reality that landlords do not do the right things. Either they won't repair things that the tenant has told them need to repair that are within life and safety condition type issues, which makes it their problem. You have a right in most leases that if the tenant tells you something's wrong, if you don't know something's wrong, if everything was fine when the tenant moved in and the tenant doesn't tell you something's wrong, you have much less liability, much less risk of them being able to get much out of you, if anything, if they didn't tell you something was wrong. Now, if they tell you something's wrong and you don't fix it, then you've got all kinds of liability. Now, you're just saying, hey, I'll just take the risk. Also, how you deal with the tenant. I've seen people do ridiculous things. For example, I've seen people take air conditioners off if they won't pay, or take the door off if they won't pay, turn the lights off if they won't pay. And, you know, grandma's insulin in the refrigerator goes bad and grandma dies, you got some big problems there. So when we come back, we'll get deeper into the subject. But there really is 4 layers of liability protection I want to cover with you. We'll be right back with the Del Walmsley Radio Show.
Teaching you with a roadmap to creating the lifestyle you really want. Keep listening. The Del Walmsley Radio Show returns in moments.
Lifestyles Unlimited member Chad on the life-changing rewards of real estate investing.
Whenever you have residents coming in thanking you for taking what was dull and drab and turning it around, making their lives better, that's definitely a blessing.
Become a life changer today with Lifestyles Unlimited. Text the word radio to 88007. That's radio to 88007. Join for just $297. A 60% off savings. Lifestyles Unlimited. Text radio to 88007.
You're hearing the Del Walmsley Radio Show. Want more life-changing knowledge? Access our podcast and listen on demand at lifestylesunlimited.com under the radio tab. Now your host, Del Walmsley.
Welcome back to the Del Walmsley Radio Show. Today, we're in the mailbag, and the last email that we were discussing as we went to break was about liability protection. And I was making the comment that there's 4 different levels of liability protection. The first level liability protection is your property management style and education. Are you doing the right things that will keep you from getting sued? There are multitudes of things you should know, things to know not to say, things to do, responses to problems. This type of information and education you need to get. That's why you need to come into a place like Lifestyles Unlimited to get it. You can get it wherever you're going to get it, but you need to get it somewhere. The second level is liability insurance, up to $1 million, at least $1 million worth of liability protection and policy on each property. And if you have an LLC, you know, everything that's inside of that LLC, that $1 million. The next level could be an LLC. Right, so many people buy single-family houses in their own name, but they get these liability policies. I'm going to take and throw one more on top of that, which is instead of just getting an LLC, get a extended coverage. They call it umbrella insurance. It's called excess liability insurance. In other words, if anything happens, you get sued for more than the $1 million, the excess liability policy kicks in. And then, of course, you got the LLC. So there's your 4 levels of liability protection. But remember, an LLC protects you from the inside out. It doesn't protect you from the outside in. So if you own real estate in an LLC and someone sues you personally, if you own that LLC, they get the LLC and everything that's in it. I know a lot of people think if you have an LLC that's not in your name when they sue you, that you can't take it. But the problem is you own the LLC. So the only way the LLC actually works to protect you in that case is somebody else has to own the LLC, or your trust has to own the LLC. Then you don't own it. They sue you. There's nothing they can get. Now, it does make it difficult, right, to have an LLC in place for someone to sue you and get your assets, but it doesn't make it impossible, all right? So that's the issue that we have. Now, the next email I have is really complicated. It's complicated because life is complicated. And so we'll try to dig into this and see if we can get it laid out there for you. Being on the radio, it's hard because you can't write all these details down in front of you to work it out. So I'll try to work through it with you. It says, I've been listening to your program sporadically for the last few months. I'm looking for a better lifestyle. I may be in a better spot than most working stiffs, but I'm a prisoner of my own business. A quick background. First of all, I live in the Commie Coast, so doing any residential rentals in my home state of California is no. I'm a chiropractor, a physician. I have perfect credit score, and I have no debt other than mortgage on my home. My personal income is in excess of $200,000. I think it says $214,000 here, $214,500. I know my practice value will likely be around $500,000 when it comes time to sell it. I own 20% of the medical building that I'm in, the practice is in, and that's valued. The value is probably $750,000. Now, what I didn't get is the building $750,000? He owns 20% of that, or is his 20% $750,000? I'm going to assume in California that his 20% is $750,000, which is a mistake to what I had looked at before. In fact, that's going to change my calculation because I just now caught that. I really think that there's no way a building that you could have 4 different people own in California would be $750,000. So I'm going to assume it's $750,000 is his share of that, right? My IRA is not that much, not even worth talking about. I'm looking for a way to retire with as much or more income than I am currently generating, with the real benefit of the assets and appreciation yearly. I'm thinking that doing a smaller apartment complex where I could have someone else manage it, since I would not have the ability to do that while running my practice and treating patients. The thought of doing an IRO, with the first one being done as a hard money scenario, was my original idea prior to listening to your show on the radio. Do you think it would be a good route for me to start with your system in the multifamily route, or would you still think that single family is the way to start? So this is very complicated, but we got to first of all work in it. We've got to back into it. He wants to replace $215,000 with income. Well, the first thing that I would consult him to is this, is that he doesn't earn $214,000 worth of income. Well, he might earn that, but he doesn't take that home. And so I did some quick math here for him. And let me see my time here. If he lives in California and he's paying a 36% tax bracket, his income taxes, national income tax, would be $77,000. If, because it's marginal taxes, meaning you don't pay the 36% the entire way up, you have these different margins, brackets of income, he may only be paying 30%. So at 30% total taxable national tax rate, that's $64,000 a year. But because he owns his own business, he has to pay both sides of Social Security and Medicare, which is 15.3%. That's another $32,000 rounded off. And he's in the state of California, which means he pays state income tax of anywhere from 8 to 12%. I'm going to assume he's at least 10% with the amount of money he's making. So that's another $21,000. So he's paying taxes of $117,000 a year. That means he's only taking home $97,000. That's the first thing you have to realize. If you can't let that go, then you have a much harder time doing what I did, which was retire in 2.5 years. If you can let that go, then you realize that all you're really living on is $97,000 a year. Then when we replace that income with passive income from real estate, which is tax-free when you get it, it was tax deferred as long as you do the right things to keep it tax deferred. In that particular case, he only has to earn $97,000 to replace it. So we go over here, and I have to change the number, so I have to pull out the trusty cell phone calculator again, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do on the radio. I know that. But if I take $750,000 worth of value for the building, and his practice is worth $500,000, he's got a net worth of $1.2 million. Right? And if you take $97,000, take 97,000 divided by 1,250,000, that's a 7.7% return is all he has to earn, about 8%. And if he can earn 8% with that $1.2 million, he's going to be able to replace that income. So I'm going to write that down here, $1.25 million. Now, this is where it gets even more complicated. So he said before he listened to my radio show, he thought he would use hard money to buy an apartment complex and operate it himself. Well, he also admitted it won't work in California. He's not going to be able to do it there. He's going to have to go somewhere else and do it. And then he said he wanted to use hard money. Well, hard money can be used to buy an apartment complex. But the reality is you have to have massive amounts of repairs to make it work. We had a deal with the Expo where a guy bought a 8-unit apartment complex, used hard money, came out of pocket, only $100,000 out of pocket, and then turned around and made the thing worth some ungodly amount of money. I don't remember what it was, but he made net in 1 year $1 million on the deal. So you have to understand, though, but in that case, it was a massive renovation. If there's no renovation, the hard money loan won't work. You're going to have to use conventional financing. And in that case, he needs to pull this money out of these businesses before he can go do that kind of a deal. So there's where it becomes very complicated for him. Is he going to quit his job and sell his building, sell off his 20% of the building? Is he going to sell his practice and then come buy an apartment complex? Now, you won't do it in California, and you won't do it as a hard money loan unless you could go wherever it is you're going to renovate this thing and do it. That isn't going to work for you, right? It's just not going to work because you're going to have to leave California. You cannot go do a massive apartment complex renovation and not be there. You cannot hire a management company to do an apartment complex renovation. That isn't going to work. You'll lose your hind end in that kind of an arrangement. So what are his options? Well, his options are simply he's going to need to come into a place like Lifestyles where there's syndications and get himself in other people's deals and then look for the kind of deal he wants where he can get these large rates of return. But what he did not share, and I've noticed this, and I wanted to bring this back to your attention, was what was his personal residence worth. Generally, guys like this have paid in full residences also. So he may have a net worth way larger than $1.25 million. Let's say, he has another, $1 million residence. That net worth could be pulled out there and brought another $800,000. That would make this $2 million. Now, the interesting point here is that he only needs $97,000 to be retired a year, $97,000 a year in income. He thinks he needs $214,000 a year to retire, but he really doesn't because he's paying massive taxes on the money that he earns. And the income that would be bringing him from passive income wouldn't be paying taxes on that. So he only needs $97,000 to replace what he's earned. In his situation, it'd be very easy for him to go out there, pull some money out of his house, pull some money out of whatever other assets he's got, and get it in with passives and start building up some passive streams of income until he gets up to $97,000 or, roughly $100,000. He might even just, get halfway there, get $50,000 or $60,000 worth in, and then decide to start selling off like the building that he has, that he owns 20% of, sell off his 20% share of the building that his practice is in, and then after that, sell the practice last and be done with it, right? So there's a lot of ways to go here, but the first and most important thing is for him to realize, if he's listening out there, and I don't want to say your name because I didn't ask you to use your name, and since you're a doctor and everything, I know a lot of people probably know who you are. But if you're out there and you're hearing this, realize the first thing you have to realize is you don't take home $214,000 if that's what you actually earn. I'm assuming you told me your income for 2023 was $214,500. That's your income. Well, that's not your take home, right? So until you realize that, you're going to have a hard time replacing $214,000. It's going to be more difficult. Now realize that with the $1,250,000, you only need a very, very small rate of return, 7-8% return to retire. That's not much. That's really easy. I mean, we're making rates of return in equity captures anywhere from 50 to 100%, and cash flows anywhere from 8 to 15%. So it is very possible for you to retire. You just have to, like I said, wrap your arms around the taxes you're paying, which I don't know if you actually even realize you're paying them. All right, moving on to the last one. A question came in and said that now that the Federal Reserve has cut the interest rates, consumers' expectations have grown, but markets don't always work the way most people imagine. For example, the Fed reduced the rate. To explain that, if the Fed reduces the rate, number one question, will interest rates be guaranteed to drop on the market interest rate? So in other words, the Fed is taking the Fed rate and lowering it. Does that mean that we'll automatically get lower interest rates out to us that we get to use? And the answer, and I actually went through and asked this on stage at the expo of a mortgage broker of one of the larger brokerage firms in the country, he said no, because what happens is the Fed has interest rate that they're borrowing the money at, the lenders are, and then they're putting a margin of profit on top of that. When the interest rates are really, really high, they had to cut those margins down, the margins of profit down, to be able to get an interest rate low enough to make deals work. Now that the Fed is lowering the interest rate, the first thing they're going to want to do is not lower the rates, but regain that lost margin. And so in many cases, when the Fed lowers the rate, it doesn't correspond directly to a rate reduction at market rate. So that was interesting. The second question is, will the first drop guarantee that there'll be additional drops? And the mortgage broker told me, he said, not necessarily. He said, although right now the marketplace feels that there's at least 2 more quarter point drops that have been baked in for this year. That's what they're saying. But that could all go up in smoke instantly if all of a sudden inflation jumped back on the bandwagon here. All right, my friends, looks like we're over here. And remember always, it's not just the money, it's the lifestyle. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.
The information and opinions you hear on the Del Walmsley radio show are those of the host, Del Walmsley, his guests, and his callers. The Del Walmsley show is for entertainment purposes only. Please consult a professional regarding your personal investment needs. Nothing presented on the Del Walmsley show constitutes an endorsement, recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any product or security.